Mark hummed a little tune as he scrubbed the kitchen counter one last time. Bleach fumes filled the air, a smell he found oddly satisfying. It meant clean. It meant gone. He'd thought of everything. Gloves, shoe covers, even a disposable jumpsuit. He'd meticulously wiped down every surface he touched, every doorknob, every light switch. He'd even remembered to flush the toilet twice, just in case. He glanced around the small apartment. Sarah wouldn't be bothering anyone anymore. He'd made sure of that. And he'd been so careful. He'd worn a mask, so no stray hairs or skin cells would give him away. He was a ghost, a whisper in the wind. He left nothing behind. Or so he believed. Mark wasn't a hardened criminal. He was an accountant, a numbers guy. He liked things neat, organized, and controlled. Sarah had been messy. She'd disrupted his carefully constructed world. He'd asked her to stop. He'd pleaded, even. But she wouldn't listen. So, he'd taken matters into his own hands. Now, all that was left was to dispose of the jumpsuit and tools. He'd already driven several miles out of town to a remote area, a place where no one ever went. He'd burn everything, scattering the ashes to the wind. By morning, it would be as if nothing had ever happened. He smiled, a cold, unsettling expression that rarely touched his eyes. He was free. He was safe. He was in control. Or so he thought. He double-checked his pockets, making sure he hadn't missed anything. Phone, wallet, keys, everything was accounted for. He took a deep breath, the bleach smell stinging his nostrils. It was time to go. Time to resume his life. Time to forget. But forgetting, he would soon discover, wasn't as easy as cleaning. Because even the most meticulous plans could be undone by something as simple, as overlooked, as the residue left behind in a toilet. A tiny trace of who he truly was, lingering in the most unexpected of places, waiting to betray him. The yellow police tape rippled in the gentle breeze, a stark contrast to the cheerful flower boxes that lined the balcony of Sarah's apartment. Inside, the scene was anything but cheerful. The living room, usually filled with Sarah's vibrant artwork and quirky decorations, was now a sterile landscape of evidence markers and somber faces. Sarah lay on the floor, a splash of crimson against the pale carpet. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. A single lamp cast long, eerie shadows across the room, highlighting the unnatural stillness. She had been a whirlwind of energy, a painter, a dancer, a free spirit. Mark had hated that about her. He preferred order, predictability, a world where everything had its place. Sarah had been chaos personified. Detective Johnson knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. He'd seen too many scenes like this. Too much wasted potential, too much senseless violence. He gently closed Sarah's eyes, a small act of respect in the face of such brutality. "'Cause of death?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Looks like blunt force trauma," replied Officer Miller, pointing to a heavy glass vase lying nearby. "Probably the murder weapon." Johnson nodded. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. They needed more. They needed something that would tie someone to this crime. He surveyed the room, his eyes scanning every detail. It was clean, too clean. Almost as if someone had tried to erase all traces of their presence. That, in itself, was a clue. This wasn't random, he muttered to himself. This was personal. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the apartment one last time. The air was thick with the scent of bleach, a telltale sign of someone trying to cover their tracks. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to find justice for Sarah. He owed her that much. And somewhere, hidden beneath the layers of cleaning and deception, he knew there was a clue, a tiny piece of evidence that would lead them to the killer. He just had to find it. The forensic team arrived like a swarm of worker bees, buzzing with purpose and efficiency. They were led by Detective Johnson, a seasoned veteran with a sharp eye for detail and an unwavering commitment to justice. Beside him walked Emily, a young, eager forensic technician fresh out of the academy. She was bright, enthusiastic, and determined to prove herself. Emily carried her kit with a sense of reverence. Inside were the tools of her trade: swabs, collection vials, fingerprint brushes, and a high-powered UV light. She felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation as she stepped into Sarah's apartment. This was her first major case, and she knew that every detail mattered. "All right, team," Johnson announced, his voice cutting through the silence. "Let's get to work. Treat everything as evidence. Bag and tag everything. And for God's sake, be careful." The team spread out, each member focusing on their assigned task. They moved with a practiced grace, their gloved hands meticulously collecting samples and documenting their findings. Emily started in the living room, carefully examining the blood spatter patterns on the wall. She took photographs, measurements, and collected samples for DNA analysis. The scene was disturbing, but she tried to remain detached, focusing on the scientific process. She noticed the almost clinical cleanliness of the apartment. There were no stray hairs, no misplaced objects, no signs of a struggle beyond the immediate area around Sarah's body. It was as if someone had meticulously erased all traces of their presence. It was unsettling. "This is weird, Detective," Emily said, approaching Johnson. "It's like they knew what they were doing. They cleaned up everything." Johnson nodded grimly. "That's what I'm afraid of. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. This was planned." He looked around the room, his eyes narrowing. "They might have cleaned up the obvious stuff, but they can't erase everything. There's always something left behind. We just have to find it." He clapped Emily on the shoulder. "Show me what you've got, kid." Emily, feeling the weight of his words, redoubled her efforts. She knew that Sarah was counting on them. And she wouldn't let her down. Hours passed, and the initial flurry of activity began to slow. The team had meticulously combed through the apartment, collecting every conceivable piece of evidence. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, a sense of frustration settled over the scene. Fingerprints were smudged and incomplete, likely wiped clean. The few hairs they found were Sarah's own. The blood spatter analysis provided some clues about the sequence of events, but nothing that directly implicated a suspect. Detective Johnson paced the living room, his brow furrowed in concentration. He knew that time was of the essence. The longer they waited, the colder the trail would become. The killer could be anywhere, erasing their tracks, building an alibi. "Anything, people?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of desperation. A few murmured replies of "nothing significant," detective echoed through the room. Emily, who had been diligently working in the kitchen, approached Johnson, her face etched with disappointment. "I've swabbed every surface, detective," she said. "Counters, cabinets, even the refrigerator. But it's all clean. Too clean. It's like they knew exactly what to do." Johnson sighed. "I know, Emily. I know. They were thorough." He ran a hand through his thinning hair, feeling the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. He'd seen cases like this before, cases where the killer was meticulous and cunning, cases that went cold and haunted him for years to come. He refused to let that happen to Sarah. "Think outside the box, people," he urged, his voice regaining its edge. "They can't erase everything. There has to be something we're missing." He looked around the apartment, his eyes searching for anything that might have been overlooked. The bathroom. He hadn't really focused on the bathroom. It seemed too obvious, too likely to have been thoroughly cleaned. But maybe, just maybe, the killer had made a mistake. Maybe, in their haste to erase all traces, they had overlooked something. It was a long shot, but it was all they had left. "Emily," he said, turning to the young technician. "Take another look at the bathroom. I want you to swab everything. Every surface, every fixture. Leave no stone unturned. Emily hesitated for a moment, glancing at the pristine bathroom. It was small, sterile, and smelled faintly of bleach, even stronger than in the rest of the apartment. The white tiles gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, and the chrome fixtures sparkled. It looked like something out of a magazine, not a crime scene. "Are you sure, detective?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It looks spotless." Johnson nodded, his gaze unwavering. "That's what I'm counting on." They might have been too confident, too focused on the obvious. They might have thought they'd gotten away with it. Emily took a deep breath and stepped into the bathroom, her kit in hand. She started with the sink, carefully swabbing the faucet handles and the drain. Then she moved on to the mirror, checking for any lingering fingerprints or traces of saliva. Everything was clean. Impeccably clean. It was almost unnerving. She was about to give up when her eyes fell on the toilet. It was sparkling white, seemingly untouched. But something about it bothered her. It was too perfect. Too pristine. She remembered a lecture from the academy, a seasoned forensic scientist telling them about the importance of looking beyond the obvious. "Criminals make mistakes," he'd said. "They might clean up the blood, but they forget about the little things. The things they don't think matter." Emily decided to take a chance. She reached into her kit and pulled out a fresh swab. With a steady hand, she swabbed the inside of the toilet bowl, paying particular attention to the rim and the underside. Then, almost as an afterthought, she swabbed the toilet handle. It seemed like a waste of time, a futile gesture in a room that had been scrubbed clean. But as she carefully sealed the swabs in their collection vials, a tiny spark of hope flickered within her. Maybe, just maybe, she had found something. Maybe, in the killer's arrogance, they had overlooked the one thing that would bring them to justice. Only time, and the lab, would tell. For now, it was all she had. And she would cling to it with everything she had. She carefully labeled the vials, writing "toilet bowl" and "toilet handle" in neat, precise letters. This small act felt significant. She felt like she was contributing to finding Sarah's killer. The lab was a world of its own, a sterile environment filled with the hum of machinery and the quiet concentration of scientists. Rows of equipment lined the walls, centrifuges, DNA sequencers, and mass spectrometers, all humming and whirring, performing their delicate tasks. Emily arrived at the lab early the next morning, her hands clutching the evidence box containing the swabs from Sarah's apartment. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach as she handed the box to Dr. Ramirez, the head of the DNA analysis unit. Dr. Ramirez was a formidable woman, known for her sharp intellect and her unwavering dedication to her work. She examined the evidence labels with a critical eye, her expression unreadable. "Toilet bowl and handle?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Seriously?" Emily blushed, feeling a surge of self-doubt. "I know it's a long shot, Dr. Ramirez," she stammered. "But the apartment was so clean. I thought it was worth a try." Dr. Ramirez sighed, but there was a hint of a smile in her eyes. "All right, Emily. We'll give it a shot. But don't get your hopes up. DNA from a toilet is usually too degraded to be of any use." She led Emily to a small, enclosed room where the DNA extraction process would take place. She explained each step carefully, from lysing the cells to purifying the DNA. It was a delicate and time-consuming process, and there was no guarantee of success. "The problem with DNA from a toilet is that it's exposed to all sorts of contaminants," Dr. Ramirez explained. "Water, cleaning products, bacteria, they all break down the DNA, making it difficult to amplify and analyze." Emily watched intently as Dr. Ramirez worked, her movements precise and efficient. She knew that the odds were stacked against them, but she refused to give up hope. She'd come this far, and she was determined to see it through. She thought of Sarah, and the promise she'd made to find her killer. This wasn't just science, it was about justice. It was about giving a voice to the voiceless. The extraction process took several hours. By the end of the day, Emily was exhausted, but she couldn't leave. She had to know the results. She watched as Dr. Ramirez loaded the DNA samples into the PCR machine, the machine that would amplify the DNA, making it possible to analyze it. "All right, Emily," Dr. Ramirez said, her voice tinged with anticipation. "Let's see what we've got." They both stared at the computer screen, waiting for the results to appear. The tension in the room was palpable. It felt like everything was on the line. The computer screen flickered, displaying a series of graphs and charts. Dr. Ramirez leaned closer, her eyes scanning the data. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Well, Dr. Ramirez muttered, her voice filled with surprise. Emily's eyes widened. "What is it? Did we get something?" Dr. Ramirez nodded slowly. "We got something. It's not much, but it's definitely there. A partial profile." Emily couldn't believe it. A partial DNA profile from a toilet? It was almost unheard of. "It's degraded, of course," Dr. Ramirez cautioned. "Lots of gaps and inconsistencies. But it's enough to run against the database." Emily let out a sigh of relief. "So, there's a chance we can identify someone?" "There's a chance," Dr. Ramirez confirmed. "But it's a slim one. With a partial profile, we're likely to get a lot of false positives. People who are related to the suspect, or who just happen to share some of the same genetic markers." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "But it's better than nothing. It's a start." Dr. Ramirez immediately began the process of comparing the partial DNA profile to the National Database of Offenders. It was a complex and time-consuming task, and the computer hummed and whirred as it crunched the numbers. Emily watched anxiously, her eyes glued to the screen. Each passing second felt like an eternity. She knew that the odds were still against them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. Hours passed, and the computer continued to churn. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a message appeared on the screen: "Possible match found." Emily gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. "A match? We got a match." Dr. Ramirez nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "It's a possible match," she cautioned. "We need to verify it with a full DNA sample. But it looks like we might have just gotten lucky." The name that appeared on the screen sent a chill down Emily's spine: Mark Thompson. The accountant. Sarah's killer. Or at least, a very strong suspect. The tiny bit of DNA from the toilet was about to unravel his perfectly planned crime. Detective Johnson sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen. The name Mark Thompson swam before his eyes. He reread the report from the lab, his mind racing. Mark Thompson. 38 years old. Accountant. No history of violence. A minor arrest for petty theft 10 years ago, the reason his DNA was in the system. Nothing that screamed murderer. But the DNA didn't lie. Or at least, it suggested a very strong possibility. Johnson pulled up Mark Thompson's file. A mugshot stared back at him, a bland, unremarkable face. Short brown hair, glasses, a neatly trimmed mustache. The kind of guy you'd pass on the street without giving a second glance. He ran a background check on Thompson, searching for any connection to Sarah. A few hours later, he found something. Thompson had worked at the same accounting firm as Sarah, several years ago. They hadn't worked directly together, but they would have known each other. Johnson leaned back in his chair, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Thompson, the meticulous accountant, and Sarah, the free-spirited artist. An unlikely pairing, but perhaps that was the point. Perhaps Thompson had been drawn to Sarah's chaotic energy, or perhaps he had resented it. He needed more. He needed something that would solidify the connection, something that would give him probable cause to bring Thompson in for questioning. He called Emily at the lab. "Emily, I need everything you've got on Thompson. Every detail, every data point. I want to know everything about his DNA profile." Emily promised to send him the information as soon as possible. Johnson hung up the phone and stared out the window, his mind racing. He knew that he was walking a tightrope. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He needed to be absolutely certain before he made his move. He thought of Sarah, and the promise he made to her. He would find her killer. He wouldn't let her down. He just needed a little more time. A little more evidence. And he had a feeling that it was just around the corner. The clock was ticking. He could feel it. He just hoped he could get to Mark Thompson before he disappeared. The next morning, Detective Johnson arrived at the accounting firm where Mark Thompson worked. He wanted to see him, to observe him, to get a sense of who he was. He parked across the street and watched as people streamed into the building, their faces etched with the Monday morning blues. He scanned each face, searching for Thompson. Finally, he saw him. Thompson emerged from a bus, his head down, clutching a briefcase. He looked exactly as Johnson had pictured him, ordinary, unremarkable, easily overlooked. Johnson watched as Thompson walked into the building, disappearing into the crowd. He felt a surge of frustration. He needed to talk to Thompson, but he couldn't just barge in and accuse him of murder. He needed a plan. He decided to start with Thompson's co-workers. He walked into the building and flashed his badge at the security desk. "Detective Johnson, police," he said. "I'm investigating a matter and I need to speak to a few employees." The security guard, a burly man with a skeptical expression, hesitated for a moment before reluctantly granting him access. Johnson started with Thompson's supervisor, a middle-aged woman with a weary expression. He asked her about Thompson's work habits, his personality, his relationships with his co-workers. "Mark's a good worker," the supervisor said. "Quiet, reliable, always on time. He keeps to himself mostly. I can't imagine him doing anything wrong." Johnson pressed her further, asking about Thompson's relationship with Sarah. The supervisor's eyes widened. "Sarah? You mean Sarah Miller? She used to work here. I didn't realize they knew each other." Johnson nodded. "They did. How would you describe their relationship?" The supervisor hesitated. "I don't know that they had a relationship, really. They worked in different departments. I never saw them interact." Johnson thanked her for her time and moved on to other employees. He got similar responses. Thompson was quiet, reliable, unremarkable. No one seemed to know anything about his personal life. As he left the building, Johnson felt a sense of mounting frustration. Thompson was a ghost, a cipher. He was hiding something, Johnson was sure of it. But how could he prove it? He needed more evidence. He needed something that would break Thompson's carefully constructed facade. And he had a feeling that the key to unlocking the truth lay hidden somewhere in Thompson's past. He just had to find it. He decided to visit Mark's home, hoping to find some clues. He would drive by and observe the house and neighborhood. Johnson drove to Thompson's neighborhood, a quiet, unassuming suburb with neat lawns and identical houses. He found Thompson's house, a small, two-story colonial with a freshly painted exterior and a meticulously manicured lawn. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. He parked down the street and watched the house, waiting for some sign of activity. After an hour, he saw Thompson emerge from the front door, dressed in a suit and tie. He got into his car, a late-model sedan, and drove away. Johnson followed him, keeping a safe distance. Thompson drove to a nearby park and parked the car. He got out and walked towards a wooded area, carrying a small bag. Johnson's instinct screamed. This was it. This was his chance. He parked the car and followed Thompson into the woods, keeping out of sight. He watched as Thompson stopped at a secluded spot and began to dig a hole. Johnson's heart pounded in his chest. What was Thompson burying? The murder weapon. Evidence from the crime scene. He waited until Thompson had finished digging and was about to bury the bag. Then, he stepped out of the shadows, his gun drawn. Police! Don't move, he shouted. Thompson froze, his eyes wide with panic. He dropped the bag and raised his hands in the air. What's going on? He stammered. I haven't done anything wrong. Johnson approached Thompson cautiously, his gun still trained on him. He picked up the bag and opened it. Inside, he found a disposable jumpsuit, a pair of gloves, and a bottle of bleach. Johnson's eyes narrowed. This was it. He had his proof. Mark Thompson, he said, his voice cold and hard. You're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Miller. Thompson's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew it was over. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled. The tiny bit of DNA from the toilet had led to this moment. He had tried to erase all traces of his crime, but he had failed. And now, he was going to pay the price. Johnson cuffed Thompson and led him back to the car. As he drove away, he glanced back at the hole in the ground. He knew that Sarah was finally getting justice. And he knew that he had kept his promise. The arrest happened without incident. No struggle. No confession. Mark Thompson was a shell of a man, defeated. He would be read his rights at the station, and the wheels of justice would turn. It was all thanks to Emily and her sharp mind. Back at the police station, Mark Thompson sat in an interrogation room, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't said a word since his arrest, refusing to answer any questions. Detective Johnson sat across from him, his expression impassive. He knew that Thompson was a meticulous planner, a control freak. He wouldn't crack easily. Mark, Johnson said, his voice calm and measured. We know you killed Sarah Miller. We have the DNA. We have the evidence you were trying to bury. It's over. Thompson remained silent, his eyes fixed on the table. Johnson leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Why, Mark? Why did you kill her? Thompson finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. I didn't kill her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I would never do that. Johnson sighed. He knew that Thompson wasn't going to confess. He was too arrogant, too convinced of his own innocence. All right, Mark, Johnson said, standing up. We'll let the evidence speak for itself. He left the interrogation room and walked to his office. He knew that the case wasn't over. He still needed to understand Thompson's motive. He needed to know why he had killed Sarah. He pulled up Sarah's file and began to review her background. He learned more about her art, her dance, her free-spirited lifestyle. He learned about her friends, her family, her dreams. As he delved deeper into Sarah's life, he began to uncover a few inconsistencies, a few secrets. He learned that she had been struggling financially, that she had been in debt to some shady characters. He also learned that she had been involved in a minor dispute with a former business partner. Johnson wondered if Thompson had anything to do with Sarah's financial troubles or her business dispute. Perhaps he had been trying to help her, or perhaps he had been trying to take advantage of her. He decided to investigate Sarah's finances and her business dealings. He spent hours poring over bank statements, contracts, and emails. Finally, he found something. A series of large cash transfers from Thompson's bank account to Sarah's bank account. The transfers had started a few months before Sarah's death and had continued until the day she died. Johnson's eyes widened. This was it. This was his motive. He called Emily at the lab. Emily, I need you to analyze something for me, he said. I need you to compare the handwriting on these bank transfer slips to Thompson's handwriting. I need to know if he's the one who filled them out. Emily promised to get back to him as soon as possible. Johnson hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He knew that he was close to solving the case. He knew that he was close to understanding why Mark Thompson had killed Sarah Miller. He just needed a little more time. And he had a feeling that time was running out. He thought about Mark's personality, the neat, orderly accountant. It was the opposite of Sarah's personality. But why would that lead to murder? Was it envy? Was it disgust? Was it something else entirely? He had to know. He had to dig deeper. There had to be a trigger, a reason for the extreme act. The call came late that evening. It was Emily. "Detective," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I've got the results of the handwriting analysis. It's a match." Thompson wrote the transfer slips. Johnson felt a surge of satisfaction. He had his motive. He had his connection. He had his proof. But he still needed one more thing. He needed a full DNA sample from Thompson to confirm the match from the toilet. He couldn't just ask Thompson for a sample. He would refuse. He needed to get it surreptitiously. He consulted with the district attorney. They agreed that they needed to obtain a warrant to collect a fresh DNA sample from Thompson. But they couldn't tell the judge that they suspected Thompson of murder. They didn't have enough evidence to convince him. They decided to use a ruse. They would claim that Thompson was a suspect in a minor traffic violation, a hit-and-run accident. They would obtain a warrant to collect a DNA sample to compare to the DNA found on the victim's car. It was a risky move, but it was their only option. The next morning, 2 uniformed officers pulled Thompson over for a minor traffic violation. They claimed that he had been speeding. They issued him a ticket and asked him to step out of the car. As Thompson was standing by the side of the road, one of the officers surreptitiously swabbed the inside of his cheek. It was quick and painless, and Thompson didn't suspect a thing. The officers took the swab back to the lab, where Emily was waiting. She immediately began the process of analyzing the DNA. Hours later, she called Johnson with the results. "Detective," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's a match. The DNA from the traffic stop matches the DNA from the toilet. It's him. It's definitely him." Johnson let out a sigh of relief. He had done it. He had caught Sarah's killer. He knew that the trial would be long and difficult. Thompson would fight every step of the way. But Johnson was confident that justice would prevail. He had the evidence. He had the motive. And he had the determination to see it through. He knew that Sarah was finally at peace. And he knew that he had kept his promise. It was a satisfying feeling, knowing that he had brought a killer to justice. All because of a toilet swab. A seemingly insignificant detail that solved a murder. Emily's sharp mind and dedication to detail had made all the difference. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation. Mark Thompson sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of composure. He looked nothing like the panicked man Johnson had arrested in the park. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his hair neatly combed, his glasses perched on his nose. He was back in control. Or so he thought. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor laid out the case against Thompson, meticulously detailing the evidence, the DNA from the toilet, the buried jumpsuit, the financial transfers. Thompson's lawyer, a seasoned veteran known for his aggressive tactics, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the DNA could have been transferred accidentally, that the jumpsuit could have belonged to someone else, that the financial transfers were simply a loan. The trial proceeded with testimony from forensic scientists, police officers, and witnesses. Emily took the stand, her voice clear and confident as she explained the DNA analysis process. She described how she had extracted the DNA from the toilet, how she had compared it to the national database, and how she had finally obtained a full DNA sample from Thompson. Thompson's lawyer grilled her relentlessly, trying to discredit her testimony. He questioned her methods, her qualifications, her objectivity. But Emily stood her ground, calmly and professionally answering every question. Detective Johnson also took the stand, recounting the events leading up to Thompson's arrest. He described how he had followed Thompson to the park, how he had caught him burying the evidence, how he had finally brought him to justice. Thompson's lawyer attacked Johnson's credibility, accusing him of bias, of jumping to conclusions, of manipulating the evidence. But Johnson remained steadfast, his testimony unwavering. As the trial progressed, the evidence against Thompson mounted. The jury listened intently, their faces etched with concern. They knew that they held Thompson's fate in their hands. They had to decide whether he was guilty or innocent. And they had to do it based on the evidence presented in court. During a break in the proceedings, Johnson saw Emily in the hallway. He walked over to her, a smile on his face. "You did great, Emily," he said. "You were amazing." Emily blushed. "Thanks, detective," she said. "I just told the truth." Johnson nodded. "That's all we can ask for," he said. "The truth will set us free." He knew that the trial wasn't over yet. There were still closing arguments to be made, jury deliberations to be held. But he had a feeling that the truth would prevail. He had a feeling that Mark Thompson would finally be held accountable for his actions. He had a feeling that Sarah would finally get justice. He and Emily had done their jobs. The rest was up to the jury. The closing arguments were passionate and compelling. The prosecutor painted a picture of Mark Thompson as a cold-blooded killer, driven by greed and resentment. He argued that the evidence was overwhelming, that there was no doubt that Thompson was guilty. Thompson's lawyer, in contrast, portrayed Thompson as a victim of circumstance, a man who had been wrongly accused, a man who had been caught in a web of circumstantial evidence. He argued that the prosecution had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, that there was still room for doubt, that the jury should acquit Thompson. The judge gave the jury their instructions, reminding them of their duty to be fair and impartial, to consider all the evidence, and to reach a verdict based on the law. The jury retired to the jury room to begin their deliberations. Hours passed. The courtroom was silent, except for the occasional cough or rustle of paper. Everyone waited anxiously for the jury to return. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the jury foreman signaled that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of activity. The judge took his seat, the lawyers gathered at their tables, and Mark Thompson sat rigidly, his face a mask of composure. The jury filed into the courtroom and took their seats. The foreman stood up, his face solemn. "Mr. Foreman," the judge said. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied. "Please read the verdict," the judge said. The foreman cleared his throat and read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Thompson, guilty of murder in the first degree." A gasp swept through the courtroom. Some people wept, others cheered. Detective Johnson and Emily exchanged a look of satisfaction. They had done it. They had brought Sarah's killer to justice. Mark Thompson's face crumpled. His carefully constructed facade finally shattered. He was no longer in control. He was no longer safe. He was going to prison for the rest of his life. The judge sentenced Thompson to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, Thompson turned to Johnson and Emily, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't heard the last of me," he snarled. Johnson simply shook his head. "It's over, Mark," he said. "It's finally over." He watched as Thompson disappeared through the door, his life stripped away. In the days and weeks that followed, Detective Johnson and Emily received accolades for their work on the case. The media hailed them as heroes, praising their dedication and their ingenuity. But for Johnson and Emily, it wasn't about the accolades. It was about Sarah. It was about bringing her killer to justice. It was about giving her a voice, even in death. They visited Sarah's family, offering their condolences and sharing the news of Thompson's conviction. Sarah's mother wept, thanking Johnson and Emily for their tireless efforts. "You brought my daughter justice," she said. "I will never forget what you did for us." Johnson and Emily also visited Sarah's grave, paying their respects to the woman whose life had been tragically cut short. They stood in silence for a few moments, reflecting on the case and on the importance of their work. As they walked away from the grave, Johnson turned to Emily, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, Emily," he said. "This case taught me something. It taught me that even the smallest piece of evidence can make a difference. It taught me that even in the most hopeless situations, there's always hope. And it taught me that even the most meticulous criminals can make mistakes." Emily smiled. "I learned a lot too, Detective," she said. "I learned that forensic science is a powerful tool, that it can be used to bring justice to victims and to hold criminals accountable. And I learned that even a seemingly insignificant detail, like a swab from a toilet, can unravel a perfectly planned crime." They walked back to the car, their hearts filled with a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. They had solved the case. They had brought Sarah's killer to justice. And they had done it together. They knew that there would be other cases, other challenges, other criminals to catch. But they also knew that they were up to the task. They were a team. And they were committed to serving and protecting their community. They would always remember Sarah and her case. It would serve as a reminder of the importance of their work. A reminder that every detail matters. And a reminder that justice, no matter how long it takes, will always prevail. The Sarah Miller case became a teaching tool for new recruits in the police academy. Emily became a sought-after speaker, sharing her knowledge of DNA evidence and inspiring the next generation of forensic scientists. Mark Thompson faded into obscurity, spending the rest of his days in a prison cell, haunted by the memory of Sarah Miller and the toilet swab that brought him down. His perfect crime was undone by the very thing he thought he had eliminated, a tiny trace of himself. The Sarah Miller case served as a powerful reminder of the importance of forensic science in the pursuit of justice. It demonstrated how even seemingly insignificant pieces of evidence, like degraded DNA from a toilet, could be used to solve complex crimes and bring closure to grieving families. Emily's work on the case became a textbook example of how meticulous investigation and innovative thinking could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. Her dedication and her sharp intellect inspired a new generation of forensic scientists to pursue their passion for justice. The case also highlighted the importance of collaboration between law enforcement and forensic experts. Detective Johnson's experience and his unwavering commitment to finding the truth, combined with Emily's scientific expertise, proved to be a winning combination. The Sarah Miller case served as a cautionary tale for criminals who believed they could outsmart the system. It demonstrated that even the most carefully planned crimes could be undone by the power of science and the determination of law enforcement. In the years that followed, forensic science continued to evolve, with new technologies and techniques being developed to analyze even the most minute traces of evidence. DNA analysis became more sophisticated, allowing scientists to extract DNA from even more degraded samples and to identify suspects with greater accuracy. The Sarah Miller case played a significant role in this evolution, demonstrating the potential of DNA evidence to solve crimes and to exonerate the innocent. The case also led to changes in police procedures, with law enforcement agencies placing greater emphasis on forensic investigation and providing their officers with more training in evidence collection and preservation. The Sarah Miller case became a symbol of hope for victims of crime and their families, demonstrating that justice, no matter how long it takes, will always prevail. It was a testament to the power of science, the dedication of law enforcement, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. It also showed that even the most ordinary people can make a difference in the world, that even a young forensic technician with a swab and a sharp mind can help to bring a killer to justice. The legacy of Sarah Miller lived on, not only in the hearts of her family and friends, but also in the collective memory of the legal system, a reminder that no crime is ever truly perfect. And what about Mark Thompson? He became just another inmate number, another forgotten face in the crowded prison system. His carefully crafted world of order and control had crumbled around him, replaced by the harsh realities of prison life. He spent his days in a small cell, haunted by the memory of Sarah Miller and the toilet swab that had brought him down. He had tried to erase all traces of his crime, but he had failed. And now, he was paying the ultimate price. His arrogance had been his undoing. He had underestimated the power of science, the dedication of law enforcement, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. He would never be free again. He would never experience the simple pleasures of life. He would never have the chance to make amends for his actions. He was a prisoner of his own making, trapped in a world of regret and despair. And so, the story of Sarah Miller and Mark Thompson came to an end. It was a story of tragedy, of loss, of justice. It was a story that would be told and retold for years to come, a reminder of the power of forensic science and the importance of meticulous investigation. It was a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, justice can prevail. It was a reminder that even the smallest detail can make a difference. And it was a reminder that even the most meticulous criminals can make mistakes. The end.